What does it take to break a stubborn woman? Not charm, not flowers, not pretty words whispered at sundown. Ask any man who ever tried, and he'll tell you the same thing. It takes a man who knows when to stop trying. This is the story of Margaret Maggie Callahan and Elias Crane, a story that played out against the cracked red earth of West Texas, somewhere between the Pecos River and the end of the known world, back when the land was still wild enough to swallow a man whole, and mean enough to test anyone who dared stay. She said no 4 times. He asked 4 times. And when he finally stopped, when the dust settled and the silence stretched long and heavy between them, she realized something that changed everything. She couldn't let him go. Stay with me, because by the time this story is done, you'll understand something about pride, silence, and the terrible courage it takes to reach for what you almost let slip away. It was the summer of 1883 when Elias Crane rode into the valley outside Dry Creek, Texas, with nothing but a horse, a bedroll, and a land deed signed 3 weeks prior by a federal clerk who'd never seen the place in his life. The land was hard, rocky in the wrong places, flat in the wrong places, and bone dry in every direction. But Elias had a gift that most men in that era didn't: patience. The kind that doesn't come from being calm, the kind that comes from having survived things that should have killed you. He built his ranch by hand, 1 post at a time, 1 fence line at a time. By the fall of 1884, he had 40 head of cattle, a proper well, and a 2-room house that didn't collapse when the wind came from the north. That's when he first saw Maggie Callahan. She was hauling a wagon load of dry goods from town, alone, because that's how Maggie did everything. When the rear wheel cracked on a stone crossing just outside her father's property line. Elias was riding the fence line when he spotted her. He didn't say a word. He tied off his horse, walked over, lifted the loaded wagon bed with his bare hands, while she slipped a replacement wheel into place, and then stepped back. "Appreciate it," she said. She didn't look at him twice. He thought about her for 3 weeks after that. Now, before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever wanted something so badly that the wanting itself started to feel like a burden? Like carrying a stone you can't set down? Drop a comment below, because Elias Crane was about to find out what that feels like. The first time Elias asked Maggie Callahan to dinner, it was October of 1884. He showed up at the Callahan ranch at a reasonable hour, hat in hand, with a jar of peach preserves. Her father had mentioned she liked. He was clean-shaved. His shirt was pressed. He'd ridden 8 miles to make that happen. Thomas Callahan, her father, answered the door with a grin so wide it nearly split his face. He liked Elias. Everyone in Dry Creek liked Elias. The man paid his debts, fixed his own fence when cattle knocked it down, and never caused trouble at the saloon, which, in that particular corner of Texas, was practically a moral achievement. Maggie appeared in the doorway behind her father. She looked at Elias. She looked at the jar of peach preserves. And then she looked back at Elias with a pair of green eyes that did not blink. "No, thank you," she said. She wasn't rude about it. She wasn't cold. She was simply certain. The way a mountain is certain. You don't argue with a mountain. You just stand there and feel small. Elias nodded, left the peach preserves anyway, and rode back 8 miles in the dark. What Elias didn't know, and what Maggie would never have told him, was why. Maggie Callahan had watched her mother run a household, raise 3 children, and quietly dissolve her own ambitions into the daily needs of a man who meant well, but never once asked what she wanted. Not because he was cruel, because it simply didn't occur to him to ask. Maggie had made a private decision at the age of 17. She would not become invisible. She managed her father's books. She negotiated with suppliers in town. When a drought hit in 1882, She was the one who found a water source 2 miles east and convinced 3 neighboring ranches to share the cost of piping it in. She wasn't angry at men. She just didn't trust that marriage, as she'd watched it, left much room for herself. And Elias Crane, with his pressed shirt and his jar of peach preserves, was exactly the kind of man she knew she could fall for. That was the problem. The second time Elias asked, it was February of 1885. A cattle dispute between 2 neighboring properties had brought most of the valley's ranchers to a meeting at the Dry Creek General Store. Elias and Maggie ended up on the same side of the argument, the right side, as it turned out, and spent 45 minutes using the same logic to make the same points to 2 stubborn men who eventually backed down. When it was over, Elias held the door open for her and said quietly, "I think you and I see things the same way. Would you let me buy you a cup of coffee?" She paused, and for just a breath, just one, something moved behind those green eyes. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. She walked to her horse and rode south. Elias watched her go. He didn't sulk, he didn't complain. He went back inside and helped stack chairs. If you're finding yourself rooting for this man, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we are just getting started, and it only gets more complicated from here. By the spring of 1886, Elias Crane's ranch had grown to 120 head of cattle. He'd hired 2 hands. He'd built a barn that people in the valley actually came to look at because it was so square and solid. It seemed to defy the wind that liked to remind everyone out there just how temporary their efforts were. He was becoming a man of some standing in Dry Creek. Not wealthy, not powerful, but respected. The kind of man whose handshake meant something. He had not asked Maggie Callahan anything in over a year, but he had done things. When a late freeze killed half the Callahan vegetable garden in March, a stack of seed packets appeared on the porch the next morning. No note. Maggie knew. When her father's oldest mare went lame, a neighbor let slip that Elias had recommended a particular farrier from a town 30 miles west. One who had a way with difficult cases. The mare recovered. When a water pipe froze and cracked one January night, Maggie found Elias already at work on it by sunrise. He'd seen the steam rising from the road. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know," he said. He finished the repair and left. She stood there in the cold for a long time after he was gone. The third time he asked, it was midsummer of 1886. There was a church social, the kind of event Dry Creek used as an excuse to pretend it was more civilized than it was. Tables under cottonwood trees, lemonade, 3 musicians who knew 5 songs between them and played each one twice. Elias found her standing near the edge of the gathering, watching the dancing with the expression of someone who enjoys a thing, but would rather die than admit it. "Would you like to dance?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something different in her face this time, not the smooth certainty of before. Something quieter, something that looked, if you knew how to read it, like effort. "I don't dance," she said. He nodded. Fair enough. He walked away. She watched him go. 2 minutes later, she saw him ask the widow Pearson to dance, a woman in her 60s who laughed like a bell and didn't hesitate for a second. They danced to a song played by musicians who weren't quite in tune, and Elias laughed with her, and it was entirely genuine. And Maggie Callahan felt something she had not expected to feel. She felt left out. Not jealous, that's too small a word. She felt the specific ache of watching something warm from a distance you chose yourself. She went home early. This is the moment where I need to pause and ask you something. Because this story isn't just about Maggie and Elias. It's about something most of us have done. Decided we knew what was best for us, and held that decision so tight we couldn't feel the cost of it. Have you ever been so certain you were right about something that you didn't notice what you were losing? Tell me in the comments. because what's coming next proves that certainty and courage are not the same thing. The fourth time Elias asked Maggie Callahan anything was the autumn of 1887. It had been a brutal year in the valley. A cattle disease swept through in the spring, claiming nearly 30% of the local herds. Elias lost 22 head. The Callahan ranch lost 15. For the first time in years, both operations were stretched thin. There was a hard practicality to that season. People stopped pretending things were fine when they weren't. The sky came down lower. Conversations got shorter. Elias found Maggie at the edge of her east field on a gray October afternoon, standing in the kind of stillness that means a person is not resting, but calculating, trying to find the math that makes things add up when the numbers are wrong. He pulled up beside her on his horse and said nothing for a moment. Then, "I know this is none of my business, but I have hay to spare from the north pasture. Take what you need." She turned to look at him, and the thing in her face this time wasn't certainty. It was something worn at the edges. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked, not angry, genuinely asking. He met her eyes. "Because you're worth doing it for." Silence stretched between them, the kind that happens when something true has been said out loud, and the air needs a moment to adjust.
No, I can't.
She looked away first.
Not anymore.
"Elias," she said quietly, "I can't be what you're looking for." He didn't argue. He didn't push. "All right," he said. He left the hay. He rode home. And for the first time, he didn't come back. A month passed. Then 2. The seed packets stopped appearing. The small repairs happened only when they were truly beyond her ability to ignore. And then were done by hired hands, not by a man on a horse she recognized from a distance before she even saw his face. Maggie told herself this was fine. She told herself this at dawn, when the light came up over the eastern ridge in colors she'd never had a reason to name before. She told herself this in the evenings, when the wind dropped and the valley went so quiet she could hear her own thoughts too clearly. She told herself this every time she passed the north fence line and saw, or didn't see, anything moving on the road beyond. But here's the thing about silence. When someone fills it long enough and then stops, the silence doesn't go back to neutral. It becomes a shape, the shape of the thing that left. It was her father who finally said it. Thomas Callahan was not a man given to speeches, but one evening in December, sitting at the kitchen table over a pot of coffee that had gone cold, he looked at his daughter and said, "That Crane boy hasn't been around." "No," Maggie said.
Yes.
"You notice."
I
A
saw.
pause. "I notice." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "That boy worked harder to earn something from you than most men work in a lifetime for anything else." Maggie said nothing. "I'm not telling you what to do," Thomas said. "You've never needed me for that. But I will tell you this. Pride is a good thing to have. Right up until it isn't." He took his cold coffee and went to bed. Maggie sat at the table for a long time. She thought about the wagon wheel on the stone crossing, about the jar of peach preserves left on the porch without expectation, about the way he danced with the widow Pearson and laughed without a trace of performance in it, about the word "all right" said quietly, without bitterness, in an October field, and how much it had cost him to say it. And she thought about her mother, about the woman who had disappeared slowly into the shape of someone else's life. But wait, was that actually what Elias Crane had been asking her to do? She went through it honestly. Every moment, every gesture, every time he had appeared, and, critically, every time he had left without demanding anything in return. He had never once asked her to be smaller. He had only ever shown up, and when she'd told him to stop, not in words, but in every way that counted, he had respected it. That's not what she'd been afraid of at all. What she'd been afraid of was feeling exactly this. This particular pull, this specific warmth in the chest when she thought of him, followed immediately by the fear of what it would cost to trust it. She had refused the feeling, not the man. The morning of December 21st, 1887, Maggie Callahan saddled her horse before sunrise. 8 miles is not a long ride in good conditions. In December, before dawn, across frozen ground, it is a different calculation entirely. She did it anyway. She arrived at Elias Crane's ranch as the sky went from black to the particular shade of blue that exists only in that exact space between night and morning. Smoke was already rising from the chimney. He was awake. She knocked. He opened the door. He was holding a tin cup of coffee. His hair was not combed. He looked at her standing there in the cold, and his face went through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, something guarded, before settling into stillness. "Maggie," he said. "I know," she said. "I know it's early. It's fine." She looked at him, straight on, the way she did everything. "You stopped," she said. He waited. "Asking," she added. "You stopped asking." Something shifted in his expression. Careful, not wanting to misread this. "You told me to," he said. "I didn't tell you to. You made it clear. I know what I made clear." She pulled in a breath of cold air. "And I was wrong. Not about what I needed, but about whether you were a threat to it." Silence. "You're not," she said. "You never were. I needed to be sure. And I took too long being sure. And you..." She stopped. He set down the coffee cup on the frame of the door. "I didn't stop because I stopped caring," he said. "I stopped because caring about someone means knowing when to get out of their way." She looked at him for a long time. "Have you had breakfast?" she asked. Something happened at the corners of his mouth. Not quite a smile yet, but close. "No," he said. "Then I'll stay." "If that's..." "It is," he said, before she could finish. He stepped back and opened the door wider. She walked in out of the cold. They married in the spring of 1888. A small ceremony at the Dry Creek Church in front of 40 people who had quietly been waiting for this outcome for the better part of 4 years. Thomas Callahan cried, which surprised no one who actually knew Thomas Callahan. The Crane Ranch, or the Crane-Callahan Ranch, as it was known from that point on, because Maggie was not about to disappear into anyone's name, grew steadily through the next decade. It became one of the more respected operations in that part of West Texas. Maggie ran the books. Maggie negotiated the contracts. Elias built things that lasted, fixed things that broke, and showed up every morning with the same uncomplicated steadiness that had first made her notice him, and last made her ride 8 miles in the December dark to say so. She never became invisible. He never asked her to. But here's the part of this story that doesn't get told enough. It wasn't Elias's persistence that won Maggie over. Persistence alone is just noise. It was his restraint. The moment he stopped asking, not as manipulation, not as strategy, but as genuine respect for her answer, was the moment she understood what he actually was. A man who could want something with his whole chest and still honor the other person's right to say no. That is not a common thing in any era. And Maggie Callahan, a woman who had spent years building walls against the ordinary kind of wanting, the kind that slowly asks you to shrink, recognized it for what it was. The one kind of wanting she could actually trust. Before we wrap up, tell me what you think in the comments. Was Maggie right to wait? Or did she hold out too long? There's no wrong answer here. This is the kind of story that looks different depending on where you're standing. And if you've made it this far, you already know the kind of stories we tell here. The ones that stick. Subscribe if you haven't. We go deep on the stories that don't get told enough, and there are plenty more where this one came from. The winter of 1894 was one of the coldest on record in West Texas. Ice on the Pecos. Cattle huddled at the southern fences. Firewood stacked high on every porch in Dry Creek. On the night of January 3rd, a fire started in the barn of a ranch 3 miles north of the Callahan property. By the time anyone saw the glow on the horizon, it was too late for the barn. But Elias and Maggie were among the first neighbors there, in the dark and the cold, helping move animals, carry supplies, keep a family from losing everything else. They worked through the night side by side. When the sun came up, they were sitting on the tailgate of a wagon, covered in smoke and ash, drinking coffee from a shared tin cup that had been offered by the family, whose loss they'd just helped contain. A child, maybe 8 years old, came and sat next to Maggie and leaned against her arm without asking. Maggie put her arm around the child. Elias watched this and said nothing. He just looked at her, the way he had looked at her since December of 1887, like someone who couldn't believe his luck and had the sense to know it. There are stories that end with a door closing. This one ended with a door opening, on a December morning that neither of them had planned, in the blue dark before sunrise, 8 miles from anywhere that anyone else would have recognized as significant. She knocked. He answered. She had ridden through the cold to say something true. He had let her say it without finishing her sentences or rushing to meet her halfway. 2 stubborn people, 1 piece of frozen ground, and enough sense between them, eventually, to stop protecting themselves from the thing they already wanted. The stories we tell about the American West tend to be about conquest. Land won, territory claimed, things built by force. But the more truthful stories, the ones that survive in letters, in diaries, in the records of small churches and small towns, are about endurance, about people who stayed, who showed up, who did the quiet work of building something that lasts, in conditions that made it hard, alongside people whose trust had to be earned slowly and kept carefully. Maggie and Elias Crane were not legends. They were ranchers. They were practical people living hard lives in a hard country. But they got one thing right that a lot of people, in a lot of eras, get wrong. They recognized what mattered, and they chose it, even when choosing it was uncomfortable, even when it required them to ride 8 miles before sunrise, even when the courage it took looked nothing like what courage is supposed to look like. It looked like a knock on a door, and a man who answered it. This video is a work of artistic reconstruction created with artificial intelligence. The characters, events, and settings depicted, including Maggie Callahan, Elias Crane, and the community of Dry Creek, Texas, are fictional and have been developed independently as a form of creative storytelling. Any resemblance to real persons or historical events is coincidental. The goal of this content is to entertain, to explore human experience, and to bring stories of the American frontier to life in a way that is meaningful and emotionally honest. For historically verified accounts of life in the American West, we encourage you to explore academic sources, state historical societies, and the Library of Congress archives.